nigga. That's all I do. Protect Village Gate. No, they got her in here. Oh, they got her outfit though. Tandem that bitch. Yo, you be having that breakdown, so that fight. Fucking sanguineous, nigga.
For the depleted chapters and losses. While the Primaris were clearly capable of working together in unity, Gulman was still well aware this was unlikely the case for starters, and what he did not want was to create any further division. As there had been so many foundings since the second founding initiated by Gulman, this did give the Primaris ability for which they Primaris supported Dawn, could be Black Templars. Subject to mass execution. This is understandable given that the Primaris of the Ultimate founding had been conducted into chapters in the same matter, while former aspirants had been required to sacrifice everything that they'd ever learned to join. The Primaris were just here and ready to go. The bigger question was spoken of by some. An obvious question that could not be put back into the bottle once it had been said aloud. Could it be possible for the Spectre Marine to be transformed into a Primaris, to gain the benefits of Mechanicus Archaeotech, yet still retain their personality and experience? My name is Calgar, Chapter Master of the Ultramarines, and asked this of Balisarius Core already, and discussed with those of his fellow Chapter Masters whom he was able to meet in person. Core had already considered this and expected it as a question. He had amassed significant theoretical data on the subject and put forward that there would be a 61 point further living a star to affect the process, as well as additional time to carry out research. There was also, of course, the moral concern whether such a transformative process should even be attempted at all. Some claim this new development to be the ultimate destiny of all Astartes, while others urge caution and some even whisper that the final conclusion is that in essence the genie would happen. Primaris were here to allow for discussion and changes until the question of Primaris transformation demonstrated either success or failure to the necessary way. So it was Chapter Master Magnus Calgar kept up as the first official test subject in the ranks of this extraordinary chapter. The operation to transform Calgar to the position of Primaris would be conducted before Calgar assumed the stellar creation process. Primaris was not being subject. In fact, many Primaris were not interested during the presence of thought their visions of torture that he had put them through as he experimented on the post-aquatic cultures would never be distant enough to ease their painful memories. Surgery was going to be expensive and agonizing. Of course, he was happy to describe the full tediousness of the description of the process. Primaris is given 3 new organs in addition to the original 19, either grafted or chemically implanted into astral space beings. The first is known as the Magnificat, which is buried deep in the brain to stimulate growth and intensify other organ function. The second is the Balisarian Furnace, which releases a saturation of hypersteroids and corticostimulants when a mortally dangerous wound is dealt to a Primaris to enable them to continue to fight. And third are the sinew coils. These are cable-like lengths of durasteel that will encase every tendon, every sinew in a metallic sheet that gives tremendous resilience and strength, and something which seems a curiously mechanicus-inspired adaptation. During the traumatic implantation process, Calgar was strapped to the wall of his slab, then lab, and cut completely down to the heel. His ribcage was cracked apart, and his physical became suppressed. The bullet in his life split out. Fires of cyber church sang blissfully mesmerized requiems, slaying their aspirations typically
I'm not about to get one.
Skull-faced soldiers took off the mutton of the statue of Chapter Master's tortured flesh for what would have been a village. Those watching from over the footprint of Kerim looked on with growing despair. Had they sacrificed his legendary Chapter Master, nearly 12 years ago. Wearing surgical clothes on Calgar's wounds, and his heart was electrically stimulated out of his body. The rebuilt body of Calgar emerged from the deformed soul of the world, returned to the world. The shock of sudden consciousness brought the mighty warrior to break free from the God's war. His blood sprayed off from his body like a slap. He stumbled to his feet, his knees but his power to the race. Chapter Master somehow clawed his way back from death. And doing so, he showed to his chapter and to all Space Marines of the Imperium that the transformation was possible. Highly traumatic, solemn, dangerous, but possible. An ever-appropriate historical metaphor, the Primaris Rubicon had been crossed, and now a new path was opened for all Astartes. entire races were rewritten multiple times in the space of only a few years. Some would be fleshed out and then remain stagnant for the next 30 years. This is Luton and welcome back for another 10 Things episode. Warhammer 40,000 has progressed through many editions since its original launch back in the late 1980s. Each progressive edition brings sparse new details and usually omits far more that have been in previous editions. It seems that the makers of 40k believe in keeping the played masses in just as much on the Imperial command. Likely for a similar reason, because the less you sit down, the less questions they'll ask, the less you have to explain. So across the decades, this is led to a lot of debate and argument. We often see people referring to things in the first edition as the origin and therefore automatically different. And that's not really the case. The function for this though does seem straightforward enough. And that's mainly because first edition simply contains far more descriptive language than those editions that would follow. And because of that, it's often assumed that because those editions must be more canon. And abrupt rewrites of material with first edition that were very different to what would come later. In fact, between the initial release of first edition and its supplements up until just before the release of second edition, a vast amount of information changed, and not small corrections, entire retcons of races in 40k and others that were just abandoned. Not to mention how drastically the miniatures themselves changed. This extremely fast development in the early period for me personally underscores why second edition was really the true origin of 40k that was shaped the game that we know now. It's a foundational experiment, but it would be instantly built upon and strategically thinned down to keep what worked best. So whilst first edition gave birth to 40k, it was second edition that defined it. I think the reason you often see people refer to things in first edition as down below. Things will be genuinely easy.
Nobody.
Strangely, due to the cults were seen as being able to somehow align with chaos. It's described that because they had stronger constitutions than ordinary humans, they could use chaos as a power source, but without so much risk that's normally associated with doing so. It all gets pretty strange, and if you can believe it, they even had Gene Stealer cult limousines. The Tyranid-Gene Stealer relationship would be revived in the later part of First Edition, and I think officially this happened within the rulebook of the precursor to Space Hulk known as Space Crusade. This originally pitted Tyranid warriors against Space Marines, but it would be updated with an advanced Space Crusade rulebook, which I believe was the first official record of the Gene Stealer Tyranid relationship. Interestingly, a year later, they published a compilation which brought many of the updates that have been posted in White Dwarf, and the Gene Stealer cult's rules appeared, except that there was no mention of Tyranids because the article had already been written before the updated retcon in the Space Crusade supplement. Anyway, things were clearly changing very fast in these years, as we know, so there's kind of some crossover that can get a bit confusing. Now, the Advanced Space Crusade rulebook is actually pretty interesting in and of itself. It's not very big, but it lays out a lot of details that, again, as with many things from First Edition, have barely been altered at all in the past 30 years. Things like, for example, the Tyranid's shadow in the warp effect. This is the first time that was ever mentioned, and it's in this kind of random supplement that goes alongside all the 40k stuff. So it's kind of cool when you go back and see this. And like I say, it's still in the lore now. It's not altered in all that time. My favourite thing I discovered in relation to this gene steal and tyrannid origin stuff though was actually a description from a white dwarf, which describes, and this is a quote, the advanced Space Crusade rulebook includes all the background information you would expect. As far as tyrannids are concerned, there are details of the horrific nature of this alien race, covering its strange collective high intelligence, sub-races, living biological record. It also reveals the real purpose of the these creatures, of course, that's what they were all along. All that strange stuff about leech raptor heads, I must have just imagined it. See, they knew what the deal was right from the beginning, 100% for sure. I like this just because of the way it's worded. It's kind of like, it's obvious that they just rewrote it because they wanted to go in a different direction, but I like how they kind of like phrased it to make it sound like, oh yeah, we were just kind of throwing you out there with this original stuff, but yeah, we knew what was going on all the time. Of course, as part of this update in first edition, the biggest change for Gene Stealers was their appearance. Gene Stealers would now look much more tyrannid-like instead of being these strange raptor leeches, which I don't think there really was ever a model for. But they still keep a lot of their lore elements as well, like their drive to conquer humanity by infiltration. Their updated form in late first edition had a carapace, muscles of purple and red, bulbous heads. They still contain their sort of Gene Stealer abilities to inject their host, except now it's less of a xenomorph egg thing, and it's more like a cancer that's injected into the host and will slowly then transform them, altering their genetic material. This creates hybrids and will create then more hybrid forms that appear more and more similar to humans, much like the original description. Now, those of you familiar with the narrative known as the War in Heaven will also be all too aware of the Old Ones, also sometimes referred to as the Slam. An important thing to note, as with everything in the first edition, the entire timeline of 40k had not been really properly established just yet. So for example, the Catan did not really even exist at this time, neither did the Necron nor the War in Heaven. So much like the Gene Stealers, the first and only reference is fleeting and would sort of be retconned, but not in a very obvious or especially clear fashion. The Slam I've talked about as being a very old race who encouraged evolutionary processes. They seeded planets and experimented with the galaxy as their playground. And after a time, though for unspecified reasons, they retired from an active role in the galaxy and moved into a period that was far more introspective. The reasons for this are deliberately vague, stating that the Slam could have discovered something in the galaxy that made them retire, or some truth or insight that is unseen by the other races. It describes them as being amphibian in their physical appearance, varying in colour from green to blue and yellow Slam. It's explained that while the technologically advanced Slam retired out of view, other more regressive primitive populations are settled on worlds sitting around the fringes of the Imperium's empire, but that these Slans seem to want for very little, they seem to have no special needs to trade, and it's even suspected that they're being watched or even studied. The entry for the Slan from here on references this primitive culture and talks little about their past with no real lore to expand upon. And this is where the difficulty with the Old Ones, or who or what they were, arises from. As I mentioned a few times throughout this video, a lot of material from the first edition still stands today, and is often surprisingly close in how modern material is referenced, because the Slam's only other mentions appear, I believe, in the Realms of Chaos book and in relation to the Eldar in the first Codex Titanicus of all places. And then after that, it's never really mentioned again past the very first edition of 40k. Apart from in the 4th edition rulebook, they very strangely, baitingly threw an image in around the topic of Xenos or Slam, and then just saw fit to leave it at that. There's no real mention of it, there's no description of it. It's really odd that it gets thrown in there, and as I say, it's 4th edition, not 2nd or 3rd, and then not after this. It's very weird how that image gets thrown in there. I mean, I genuinely wonder whether they sort of just put it in as like, whatever. The Old Ones and the Slan are a tricky subject because it all happened so long ago, at the very beginning of the galaxy, relatively speaking. So it's fairly easy to just go with the explanation of, we can't truly know, so just go with your own instincts. While the Slam specifically would not be mentioned again, the Old Ones would be discussed later, and obviously the Necron Codex primarily, so as to best frame the new narrative of the War in Heaven. The key thing for me though, from the subsequent editions, is that they're always referred to as the Old Ones, and not the Slam, as well as being described as beings of shadow and light. It's even written that Slanesh carved up the last remaining Old One with these elements of shadow and light, forming strange and passive objects known as the Umbra. The Slan were not now in the lore, they're more the these kind of strange figures without real description of shadow and light, and they're sort of more ethereal. But in regard to the lore, the Old Ones, the Slan, it's one of these tricky elements. A lot of what's written is not very clear, so as to enable you to say definitively that it was retconned or it was abandoned. In fact, far from it, because we see material like Aeneid rising to become major lore material from just vague references that were made just one time in the decades previously. So it's definitely a thing that you can find these old lore elements and they can be brought back again. However, when it comes to the Old Ones and the Slan, some of it was very clearly reworked, like how it describes in the first editions that the Eldar and Old Ones encountered one another. It wasn't that the Old Ones created the Eldar, as is kind of stated in later editions, but that they just kind of met. And they did teach them their ways, they taught them how to use the web way, for example, and that's true again in the later editions, so it's kind of all mixed together. And you could easily rationalise it and say, well, maybe this is just to do with Eldar mythology, that they were created by the Old Ones, or that they encountered them, whatever. This is the trouble with this piece in the grand puzzle, because it's very sparse, it's very vague, and it also happened a very long time ago. Still, all the stuff to do with the Old Ones and the Slan has the potential to be mentioned and updated more in current times, because Games Workshop are working on a narrative around the Eldar, the Nari, the cyclical nature of their spirits and culture, and there's a reasonable chance that things could be mentioned in relation to the Old Ones living in heaven. It wouldn't take very much to just tip the balance and be able to say definitively with some current reference which is the more plausible narrative. So we can watch this with anticipation. Hopefully some Eldar seer in an upcoming book or narrative reference in a rulebook will have some kind of vision that's going to point us in the right direction. Now, speaking of narrative, another stranger oddity in the original first edition of 40k was its Game Master role. The game itself was still essentially 40k, albeit with a considerable amount more detail applied to almost every element of the game. And 40k is usually a two-player affair, fighting with your forces to battle to the death or win some objectives, but in first there was a third role, the Game Master. Now, I've seen 40k players, competitive players, recently complaining, and complaining rightly so, that at tournament events sometimes rules are not quickly applied enough or problematic players are not appropriately reprimanded. In first edition, you actually had a referee role. The Game Master would enforce rules, make calls on decisions, for example, if a unit was not properly in cover or not, what might happen as a result of a certain action and so on. If you've moved a unit already, can you change your mind and get back, is it appropriate? So the Game Master role, though, could slow things down, but depending on who's playing, it could also speed things up. Still, it's become pretty standard and most people these days are easily capable of solving any rule-based issues themselves in mutual respect, which is why this role was probably thrown out, along with the fact that having to find a third person might not always be the easiest thing to locate every time you want to play. Although D&D is a big thing these days, so to be clear, the rulebook did suggest that it's possible to play without a GM as well. But with that said, a Game Master role for 40k could work out really well, and you could still do it, like I said, even today. For example, what if you decided to craft your own custom game between, say, 3 players instead of 2, with the Game Master taking on a specific role of, say, an independent unit or various objectives. You could corral some highly dangerous beast, for example, or weather a storm where your forces have to deal with various harsh environmental factors that are controlled and decided upon by the GM. And within the first edition of Rogue Trader, there's an expanded section which has all manner of scenario elements to build a narrative, from the strange Xenos flora and fauna that we described earlier, along with rules for hidden movement of units, environmental factors, compulsory moving, full RPG campaigns, and pages of plot generators for you to build a mission on. This is an interesting relic from this time when 40k was not really clear on what it wanted to be yet, and evidently only a few years later most of this would be scrapped. But if you're playing the game just between friends, there's interesting pieces here that could be cherry-picked to spice up some normal open games for 40k, and a great way to involve more than 2 people in just a casual fun day of gaming.
Wondersauce is a creative agency focused on digital product platforms and communication services for our clients.
All of our assets and communications happen within Dropbox. Being able to share the work we do with our clients, being able to respond to them not just in words but with assets, with deliverables, it allows us to really move at the speed that we need to move.
Dropbox Business is incredible on the go. I basically operate my life from my phone. Having all of the assets and tools you need to make the most of the time of being creative, it just makes things wildly efficient.
What makes Wondersoft successful is its ability to change, to constantly reevaluate how we operate and how we service our
Who cares how it works? Just use it. The only thing more dangerous than a person who can't get what they want is a person who gets whatever they want. Get out of the house before it's too late. Where's the necklace you want? I can't get it done.
Like much of the early 40k, were considerably more complicated than they are now. But most interestingly and strangely, dreadnoughts were seen as being more like a suit of additional armour to be piloted, not dissimilarly to, say, Centurions or Invicta tactical suits that we now see being used by regular and Primaris Astartes. However, there is also the description of dreadnoughts requiring the pilot to merge their awareness with the suit's controls, to the point that they're indistinguishable and indeed inseparable. And this makes you think something more like an Imperial Knight or even a Titan, and how the Princeps, the pilots, must merge with the machine spirit to be able to properly operate these massive war machines. So the dreadnoughts of first edition seem suggestive that at least their concept was that of proto-piloted Imperial war machines. It strangely states as well that if some pilots of dreadnoughts were encased for extended periods of time, they could go insane and become renegades, abandoning their Astartes brothers and heading off to become mad mercenaries. Another thing they describe in more detail than modern editions is how they power and drive these machines, which, as I say, is pretty rare these days. Dreadnoughts, Xenos or Imperial are described as containing a variety of power sources, either a crystal battery, a nuclear engine, a polarizing gravitable bed, or just a generic combustion engine. We can say that crystal batteries are used. The description in the first edition do talk about people piloting dreadnoughts, but it also goes on to describe how, due to the unreliability of the control systems, they might instead choose to deliberately surgically embed a model into a dreadnought, even if they didn't really have to inter them, as they do now from mortal wounding. The pilot is surgically implanted into the dreadnought capsule and suspended in amniotic fluid, which will sustain him for the rest of his life. And you do see this kind of more grimdark situation where it could be that someone is designated as being a dreadnought pilot, and instead of already being badly wounded, basically being put into the dreadnought to save your life and extend your life, they could just come along and say, hey, you're designated to go into a dreadnought, so bad luck, when you cut off your arms and legs, you're going to be put into this thing. The dreadnought pilot then, of course, will never be removed, and this obviously sets up for the later amendment to the law, which will become a process by which the mortally wounded Marines will be placed in a dreadnought and continue fighting on. However, it's an interesting fine line difference in the first edition, and actually it's pretty 40k and grim dark to imagine going down the line and picking out the short straw. Bad luck, my friend, you're losing your limbs and you're going in the dreadnought. A lot of the rules for dreadnoughts as well contained more specific unit details than modern editions. For example, you could choose build points that would determine how you spec your dreadnought in terms of the actual data profile for it. You could essentially build the actual stats of the dreadnought however you wanted within some defined limits. You could also, for example, choose how the pilot was even linked to the dreadnought machine. You could choose the Mind Impulse unit, which was the most effective, a spinal link, or just a standard pilot. Each would cost more or less points for your army and give a stat benefit for the dreadnought on the battlefield to represent their final level of control for the unit. You could spend more or less on the dreadnought's power plant, and then cross-referencing this in a table of points. The more points you spend in the power plant, the more movement the dreadnought could have. This is a very detailed system, and then continued on to vehicle damage tables, which we won't trawl through. But again, it just shows how there's a lot more thought and detail in the first edition, and that's all very well and good on one hand, it makes things very interesting, but on the other hand, it definitely slows things down just in terms of even specking and getting your units ready to play. But perhaps most enjoyable are the dreadnoughts special attacks. These are close combat focused, and you can have some kind of training, basically similar to the gun thunderstop strategy. You can also advance the enemy taller than 10 feet, which is just and that was it, which is not at all the case. It was followed up by a variety of articles and lore that regularly amended and built on the core rulebook, and then other games like Space Crusade. After this time, every edition that followed, despite the introduction of, say, a couple of new races, the Tau, Necron, etc., supplemental releases in a comparative scale, prompted very little. In fact, arguably, the only time we've seen the development was far more rapid in the first edition is right now, in the 80s. So when people talk about the first edition and rogue trading, it may be important to clarify exactly which year the first edition we're talking about, because that much has changed. The initial release of Warhammer 40,000 came in 1987, and it would be fleshed out over the years with the initial sort of codex releases. Things like Chapter Approved in 1988, which was a companion book giving a host of army lists. Then of course we had the ever-mentioned Realms of Chaos, which were a blend of Warhammer Fantasy and 40k, so you had to jump between the two things. Much like the Liber Chaotica years later in 2005, they would put out a compendium of information in 1989, and Advanced Space Crusade in 1990. In 1991, Games Workshop released a book called Warhammer 40,000 Annihilation, which contained expanded elements for Imperial Marines, but also contained huge updates for the Eldar, who were now no longer strange space pirates, but instead fully fleshed race with specialist units and even some background lore. But interestingly, the Eldar lore has probably remained some of the most consistent, and the vast majority of this original lore for the Eldar stands as it is. But even beyond that, not only the colours, but in fact the models themselves are the same. It's crazy. But the Dire Avengers and the Howling Banshees of the Eldar that I have in my own army, those are late first edition models, and those have really only now just been updated by Games Workshop, which is just mental. In this later period of first edition, they would also showcase the first colour schemes and unit designs for the new Eldar. Again, most of which, astonishingly, still are exactly the same today. That's 30 years later. And there's a lot of models from other races like Orcs, Imperial Guard, etc., which are all waiting to be updated, because Games Workshop have been updating Space Marines so much, and many of the other races have barely been touched in decades. So yes, the Illuminati were, and with a large pinch of salt, could be a thing, as long as you go along with it's not to be taken too strictly use and caution. According to the first edition, the Illuminati are one of the top heroes of the Empire. This sort of secret group share a common experience of having at one time been possessed by demons and somehow survived. Most victims of demon possession with dire authority lifetime terrain. But that is far less coming from Games Workshop itself. They are doing more to do with painting and so on, but it's even more bizarre than